Okay, so for this video blog, I don't know why I'm saying it's a video blog, you can see it's a video blog, it's me talking on a video. But I'm going to talk about a film, or three films actually. Three films, which is the Mad Max Trilogy, which I've watched over the last 3 weekends. First time I've seen them, which is a bit of a shock for someone who's a fan of sort of actiony and exploitation-y films, some degree. But yeah, and I think the first thing to say is that they're a great series of films, much better than I honestly expected them to be. I'm not a fan of Mel Gibson, for one, and there is something about films which get talked about and made up to be these big things that they're always a bit disappointing. But actually, I have to say, Mad Max, I don't think was disappointing. I think it actually a really good series of films right through, including Beyond Thunderdome, which I know seems to get a fair amount of stick, judging by the responses I got on Facebook and Twitter when I said I was watching it. Anyway, I guess the thing is that they're just three really well done exploitation action movies of the particular sort that they are. They're not trying to be anything more than they are. I don't think they ever did want to be. I mean, Beyond Thunderdome maybe did a little bit, but not too much. And they just have some great stunts, some great driving stuff, some great explosions in places, and that sort of good versus evil thing, with a bit of an anti-hero in the lead, which always makes for something interesting. And I mean, the first thing that really struck me about them was the setting for them, it being Australia, which is something a bit different for me. I've seen some Australian films, not huge numbers of them. I need to explore further, and the film Not Quite Hollywood has definitely made me realise there's a lot more to explore in the realms of Australian exploitation cinema than I possibly knew about before. But the settings of them works really well. It actually sort of, even though they were made clearly very separately from each other, they do continue the story and the setting, which is always nice in a series of films, and quite often something that doesn't happen, because you end up with a series of films where they're made by completely different people purely just to make money. But these did seem to actually be continuing a story of a sort. First one starts out, and I've done a blog on the first one, which I'll put a link to, so you can see a bit more about that. But that starts out in a very sort of, it's post-apocalyptic, but only just. It's still recognisably our world. There's still a society, even if it's a bit corrupt, and there are sort of these gangs of bikers going around causing trouble. But it's not that far from where we are now. The second film, a little bit more, obviously, is sort of what Mad Max is to a lot of people. It's what I thought Mad Max 1 was going to be, if I'm honest. It's the desert, it's the Road Warrior, and it has the Road Warriors stuff. I'm a fan of wrestling, so the Road Warriors to me is the shoulder pads, the face paint, all that kind of thing, Legion of Doom. And I can see where they got the idea from very much in this, but takes it on. It's more post-apocalyptic than the first. There's not so much fuel. The vehicles are all sort of jury-rigged a bit, and clearly a bit more homemade than in the first film, where the interceptors and things are much more just police cars with bits stuck on. And it then goes on to the third one, where it takes that even further, with communities like Bartertown having popped up, which take what the bad guy gang in the second film were doing and making it a slightly more controlled thing, albeit led by Tina Turner or led by a midget riding a giant, which is an interesting way of doing things, and I think really sums up the exploitationness of the films, which runs right through. And with those settings, the costumes and the design work really back that all up as well, and work really well in telling the story, which I think is great. And for films which clearly, I mean, maybe the third one had a higher budget, but it clearly didn't have the biggest budgets in the world. Actually, the costumes and the design is really, really good, and some of the stuff looks brilliant, although I'm still not sure where all of the bondage gear in a post-apocalyptic world is going to come from. There was a lot of that, particularly in the second one, and just looks kind of cool in places, I'll give it that, but where it came from, it seems unclear. The leader of the bad guys, the leader of the gang that are against Max in the second one in particular, really stands out for that. But yeah, it all looks really good. It all works really well, and I think that's the thing. They're three films which work really well within the genre that they know they're working in. They know they're exploitation cinema. They know that's what they're doing, and they're quite happy to do that. The first one, I guess, starts out, as my blog says, it's Ozploitation. It's clearly that particular brand of Australian cinema which came out 70s and 80s. Ridiculous cars, ridiculous stunt driving action sequences, and the only thing that's missing from this is some sort of large mutant animal, which there's Razorback kind of thing, and that, but it does have everything else that you'd expect from an exploitation film. It has car chases, it has random sex and nudity, and it has pretty full-on violence, all things considered, although there's clearly much more full-on violence out there in films both then and now. The second one is a bit more standard exploitation, albeit with the Aussie element, but it's clearly got a lot more of a... It knew it was aiming for a bigger market, I think, is the thing with the second one. You can see it in it, but it works still. And the third one, even, it's milder in its exploitation. It's more Hollywood action, but it's still not Hollywood. You can still tell this isn't a straight-up Hollywood movie, despite Tina Turner being in it. It's got a lot more of it. It's got silly, high-concept action stuff, which is the exploitation film given a bit of a budget to play with. I mean, the Thunderdome is a great example of that, with people bouncing all over the place and having a massive... You could have had two guys fighting in a cage and it would have told the story just as well. But why not put them on bouncy rubber harnesses and have chainsaws and warhammers and things all over the place as well? And it works really well for that, I have to say. And people did seem to be a bit down on Beyond Thunderdome, but I thought it fits into the series really well and works. I mean, it's a mess completely, but most of these sort of films are. It's what I expect going in, and it worked really well for me. And even Mel Gibson I could cope with in these films. I'm not a fan of Mel's, generally speaking, from any of his stuff, not just because of Passion of the Christ, but that doesn't help. But he worked well in the role. The first one, it's a little bit not sure what's going on, but I think that was my expectations of it. Second one, spot on. He's the anti-hero, but he's on the side of good. He's a nasty bit of work when he needs to be, but he's mostly working for the good guys. And the third one, similarly, and the whole thing of finding the kids in the third one seemed a little bit random, as I say, but it's a bit of a mess of a film. But in the end, it came together well with some great action stuff. And I think it's something that really surprised me about it. It's a coherent series of films. It's a coherent trilogy which works really well together to tell three separate, very similar stories, but they're action exploitation stories. It tells them well, it does them well, and that's about all you want. And to be honest, it's probably the best series of exploitation films I've seen, and some of the best exploitation cinema I've seen, in that it actually does deliver on what it promises, which most don't. So yeah, that's my thoughts, somewhat ramblingly, on the Mad Max trilogy.